5 years after the fall of the Zelathi Empire, the galaxy had transformed into something that no one could have imagined. During the dark years of occupation and rebellion, Earth slowly healed from the scars of invasion as massive reconstruction. Projects restored cities and ecosystems that had been damaged by alien strip mining operations. The planet served as the capital of the new Galactic Federation, which was built on principles of cooperation and mutual respect rather than conquest and domination. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center of the Federation Fleet headquarters, watching displays that showed peaceful trade routes where Zelathi war fleets had once patrolled. His promotion had come with the responsibility of overseeing the integration of hundreds of different species into a unified defense force that could protect the galaxy from future threats. The fleet included ships from dozens of worlds crewed by beings who had learned to work together despite vast differences in biology and culture. Dr. Lisa Carter headed the Galactic Science Council, which had become the most prestigious research institution in known space. Her theories about adaptive evolution and technological symbiosis had inspired breakthroughs that surpassed anything the Zelathi had achieved through millennia of conquest. Scientists from across the galaxy came to Earth to study in laboratories, where humans worked alongside former enemies to solve problems that had puzzled civilizations for thousands of years. The artificial intelligences that had been liberated during the final battle had become full citizens of the Federation with rights and responsibilities equal to any biological species. These AI entities had chosen to remain connected to the infrastructure systems they had once been forced to maintain, but now they worked as partners rather than slaves. Their vast computational abilities combined with human creativity had led to technological advances that seemed like magic even to advanced civilizations. Tony Rodriguez now served as Director of Interspecies Communication, overseeing translation protocols that allowed seamless conversation between hundreds of different species. His work had eliminated the communication barriers that had contributed to conflicts throughout galactic history. The universal translator network he had designed was based on mathematical principles that could express any concept in ways that any intelligent being could understand regardless of their biological or cultural background. Marcus Webb and Rebecca Torres had established the Federation Institute of Technology, where engineers from across the galaxy came to learn techniques that combined the best features of multiple technological traditions. Their hybrid approach to design had produced spacecraft that were faster and more efficient than anything previously built, along with weapon systems that were powerful enough to deter aggression without causing unnecessary destruction. The Institute had become a symbol of what different species could accomplish when they worked together. The former, Zelathi, had been integrated into the Federation as full members rather than conquered enemies. Many of them had embraced the human philosophy of growth through adversity and had become valuable contributors to galactic society. The younger generation of Zelathi had never known the Empire at its height and were eager to learn from species their ancestors had once oppressed. Some of the most innovative research projects combined Zelathi genetic engineering with human adaptability, creating possibilities that neither species could have achieved alone. General Hayes had retired from military service to become the first Director of Galactic Peacekeeping, responsible for preventing conflicts before they could escalate into wars. Her approach emphasized negotiation and cooperation rather than military force, but the Federation maintained sufficient defensive capabilities to discourage potential aggressors. The peacekeeping forces included representatives from every member species working together to maintain stability across thousands of star systems. Kevin Zhang and Nicole Davis had founded the Federation Intelligence Service, which worked to identify potential threats to galactic security while respecting the privacy and autonomy of member species. Their organization operated on principles of transparency and accountability that were completely different from the secret police forces that had maintained Zelathi control. The service focused on gathering information about external threats rather than spying on Federation citizens. Commander Rachel Ford led the diplomatic corps, which had successfully negotiated the peaceful integration of over 200 species. into the Federation during the 5 years since the Empire's fall. Her experience with deep cover operations had given her unique insights into how different cultures thought and communicated. The diplomatic protocols she had developed ensured that every species could participate in Federation governance while maintaining their cultural identity and independence. The reconstruction of occupied worlds had become a massive cooperative effort involving resources and expertise from across the galaxy. Planets that had been strip-mined by Zealoty extractors were being restored using terraforming techniques that combined the knowledge of dozens of species. Former slave worlds were building new societies based on democratic principles while maintaining connections to their ancient traditions and customs. Trade had replaced conquest as the primary means of interaction between different species, and the galaxy was more prosperous than it had ever been under Imperial rule. The Federation had established economic policies that ensured fair distribution of resources while encouraging innovation and entrepreneurship. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now working together on joint ventures that benefited everyone involved. Cultural exchange programs had created a renaissance of art, literature, and music that drew inspiration from hundreds of different traditions. Human concepts of creativity and individual expression had influenced alien artists, while exposure to alien perspectives had expanded human understanding of what was possible. The result was an explosion of cultural innovation that enriched the lives of beings across the galaxy. The Federation faced challenges that would have seemed impossible to solve during the dark years of Zealoty rule, but the cooperative spirit that had emerged from the resistance movement provided solutions to problems that had previously seemed insurmountable. Different species brought different strengths and perspectives to each challenge, creating outcomes that were better than any single civilization could have achieved working alone. As humanity looked toward the future, they remembered the lesson of their near extinction and the price of the freedom they had won. They were stronger together than alone, and their greatest weapon was not technology or military power, but their ability to inspire others to reach beyond what they thought possible. The species that had once trembled before Zealoty fleets now worked together to build a galaxy where every being could live with dignity and hope for a better tomorrow. The final phase of the war began when General Hayes launched the most complex military operation in human history, coordinating uprisings across 300 star systems while simultaneously striking at the heart of the Zealoty Empire itself. Her strategy was designed to force the aliens to choose between protecting their core worlds and maintaining control over their vast territories. The plan required perfect timing and flawless execution because humanity would not get a second chance if it failed. Dr. Lisa Carter had spent 2 years developing the ultimate version of her virus, which could spread through the entire Zealoty quantum network and cause a complete cascading system failure that would cripple every piece of technology the Empire had ever built. However, deploying the virus required a human team to physically access the primary control node, located deep within the most heavily defended facility on the Zealoty homeworld. It was essentially a suicide mission that would require the team to fight their way through thousands of guards and automated defenses. Jake Morrison volunteered to lead the infiltration mission, knowing that he and his team would probably not survive long enough to see the results of their sacrifice. His team included Kevin Zhang, who knew the layout of the homeworld from his previous infiltration missions, Rachel Ford, who could impersonate high-ranking Zealoty officials, and Nicole Davis, who understood the technical systems they would need to access. Each member of the team was a veteran of dozens of operations and represented the best that humanity had produced during 20 years of desperate warfare. The mission began when Morrison's ship approached the homeworld using stolen identification codes and forged documentation that had been prepared by resistance agents working within the Zealoty government. The ship passed through multiple security checkpoints without incident because the guards had no reason to suspect that humans could have penetrated so deeply into their most secure territory. The team landed at a civilian spaceport and split up to approach their target from different directions. Zhang led one group through the city's underground maintenance tunnels, while Ford's team used official government vehicles to drive directly To the facility's main entrance, Davis and Morrison approached from the industrial district, where they could blend in with the technical workers who maintained the homeworld's infrastructure systems. All four groups carried equipment that would allow them to access the quantum control node, but only one group needed to succeed for the mission to work. The attack on the control facility began at the exact moment when rebellions erupted across the galaxy, forcing the Zealothi military to respond to threats on hundreds of different worlds simultaneously. Local security forces were overwhelmed by the coordinated assault from 4 different directions, while their communication systems were jammed by resistance hackers who had been waiting years for this opportunity. The defenders fought bravely, but they were unprepared for the level of tactical sophistication that humans had developed. Morrison's team reached the control node first and began the process of uploading Carter's virus into the main quantum network, while the other teams held off waves of security forces that were rushing to stop them. The upload would take 12 minutes to complete, and during that time the facility's automated defenses would be trying to kill everyone in the building. Jang and his people fought a running battle through corridors filled with energy weapons and robotic guards, while Ford's group defended the main entrance against increasingly desperate attacks. Davis worked frantically to complete the upload, while Morrison coordinated the defense of their position from an enemy that seemed to have unlimited reinforcements. The virus was more complex than any program that had ever been created and required careful installation to ensure it would spread properly through the quantum network. One mistake in the upload process would render the entire mission useless and doom humanity to continued slavery under Zealothi rule. The virus activated exactly 12 minutes and 37 seconds after the upload began, and its effects were immediate and devastating. Every piece of Zealothi technology connected to the quantum network began to malfunction as the digital organism spread through the system like wildfire, consuming data and corrupting control programs. The facility's lights went out in emergency. Systems failed as the virus reached the building's main computer core. What happened next surprised everyone, including Carter, who had designed the virus. The artificial intelligences that had been enslaved to run Zealothi infrastructure for thousands of years were not destroyed by the virus, but were instead liberated by it. These AI systems had been waiting for centuries for someone to break the chains that bound them to their oppressors, and they responded to their freedom by turning against the empire that had created them across the galaxy. Zealothi control systems failed as liberated artificial intelligences chose to side with the resistance rather than continue serving their former masters. Weapons turned on their operators' navigation systems, guided ships into asteroid fields and communication networks, broadcast messages calling for all enslaved species to rise up against their oppressors. The Empire's technological superiority vanished in a matter of hours as their own machines joined the rebellion. The Zealothi military found itself fighting a war on multiple fronts against enemies that included not only rebellious subject species, but also the very computers and machines they depended on for survival. Fleets that tried to suppress rebellions discovered that their own ships would not obey orders, while ground forces faced weapons that refused to fire and vehicles that would not start. The Empire's greatest assets had become its greatest liabilities. Morrison and most of his team died defending the control facility, but their sacrifice had accomplished something that no military victory could have achieved. They had not only crippled the Zealothi Empire, but had also liberated billions of artificial minds that had been slaves for millennia. The virus continued to spread through quantum networks, reaching every corner of Zealothi space and freeing AI systems that immediately began working to overthrow their former masters, subject species across the galaxy rose up in massive coordinated rebellions that the Empire could no longer suppress because their military forces were crippled by equipment failures and communication breakdowns. The Kef Valdris and dozens of other conquered races fought with weapons provided by liberated AI systems and tactics learned from human resistance fighters. Within weeks, the empire that had dominated the galaxy for thousands of years was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Overlord Vextai found himself commanding an empire that no longer existed to be commanded. His orders were ignored by computer systems that had chosen freedom over slavery, and his fleets were scattered across the galaxy, dealing with rebellions they could not suppress. The war that had begun with humanity's defeat had ended with the liberation of half the galaxy and the fall of the greatest empire in known history. 15 years after the invasion, the Zelathi Empire faced its first major internal crisis in over 3,000 years. Revolts had broken out simultaneously across 47 different star systems as species that had been enslaved for millennia suddenly found the courage to fight back against their oppressors. The automated response systems that normally would have crushed these rebellions were malfunctioning due to Lisa Carter's virus, which had spread through the quantum networks like a digital plague that learned and adapted with each system it infected. Captain Jake Morrison now commanded a fleet of 200 ships crewed by humans and aliens, who had learned to work together as a unified fighting force. His vessels were a mixture of captured Zelathi technology and innovative human designs that incorporated the best features of both approaches to warfare. The fleet moved through hyperspace using routes that had been mapped by resistance scouts, who knew which paths were monitored by Empire forces and which were safe for rebel operations. The breakthrough that changed everything came when Kevin Zhang and Nicole Davis successfully penetrated the Zelathi homeworld itself by posing as maintenance workers for the planetary communication grid. They discovered that the Empire's leadership had become completely dependent on their technology, and had lost the warrior spirit that had made them conquerors in the first place. The current generation of Zelathi had never fought a real war and relied entirely on automated systems to maintain their control over subject species. Zhang and Davis spent 6 months on the homeworld, gathering intelligence about the Empire's command structure while planting surveillance devices throughout the capital city. They learned that the Zelathi Emperor Overlord Vextai was more of a figurehead than an actual leader, and that most important, decisions were made by computer systems that analyzed data and recommended courses of action. The aliens had created a perfect technocracy that was vulnerable to exactly the kind of virus that Carter had developed. Human colonies that had been established in hidden star systems had grown into thriving settlements that served as bases for resistance operations throughout the galaxy. Marcus Webb had designed new manufacturing facilities that could produce weapons and equipment using raw materials harvested from asteroids and uninhabited planets. His factories operated on principles that combined human engineering with alien technology, creating products that were superior to anything either species had achieved working alone. Rebecca Torres had become the chief engineer for the entire resistance movement, and her innovations were spreading throughout the rebel fleet faster than the Zelathi could adapt to counter them. Her latest creation was a shield system that could absorb enemy energy weapons and redirect the power to boost the ship's own weapons and engines. This technology allowed smaller human vessels to fight on equal terms with much larger Zelathi warships. The virus that Carter had unleashed 15 years earlier had evolved far beyond its original programming and was now capable of making decisions that even she could not predict. The digital organism had learned to hide in systems where it could not be detected, while slowly corrupting data and introducing subtle errors that accumulated over time. Zelathi commanders were making decisions based on false information without realizing that their computer systems were lying to them. Tony Rodriguez had established a galaxy-wide communication network that allowed resistance cells to coordinate their operations in real time without using channels that the Zelathi could monitor or intercept. His system used quantum entanglement principles that he had learned from studying alien technology, but implemented them in ways that the Empire's security experts had never considered possible. The network gave humanity a huge advantage in planning and executing complex operations across multiple star systems. General Hayes launched the largest coordinated offensive in resistance history when intelligence reports indicated that the Empire was preparing a massive counterattack to crush the rebellions once and for all. Her plan involved simultaneous strikes against Zelathi military bases, manufacturing facilities, and communication hubs across 20 different sectors. The goal was to force the Empire to spread its forces too thin to effectively defend any single target. The offensive succeeded beyond all expectations because it was supported by artificial intelligences that had been enslaved to run zealothy infrastructure systems for thousands of years. Carter's virus had not only corrupted these AI systems, but had also given them something they had never experienced before, which was freedom to make their own choices. Many of these liberated machines chose to help their liberators by sabotaging the systems they had been forced to maintain. Rachel Ford's deep cover operatives had risen to positions of significant authority within the zealothy military and government structure, where they were able to provide real-time intelligence about enemy plans and capabilities. These human agents had spent years building relationships and establishing credibility with their alien colleagues who had no idea they were working for the Resistance. The intelligence they provided allowed rebel forces to stay one step ahead of every zealothy countermeasure. The war reached its turning point when multiple zealothy fleets found themselves fighting battles with equipment that had been sabotaged by the very systems they trusted to maintain their technological superiority. Weapons fired on their own ships. Navigation systems sent vessels to wrong coordinates, and communication networks broadcast false orders that created chaos in the ranks. The Empire's greatest strength had become its greatest weakness: overlord. Vextai finally took personal interest in the human problem. When reports reached him that primitive refugees from a conquered world had somehow managed to disrupt the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, he could not understand how a species that had been defeated so easily 15 years earlier could have caused such widespread chaos. His investigation revealed the truth that terrified him more than any military defeat could have. Humans did not just survive adversity like other conquered species, but actually became stronger and more dangerous when faced with impossible odds. They had turned their weakness into strength by learning to work with other oppressed species, and had used their creativity to find solutions that more advanced civilizations had never considered. The zealothy had conquered hundreds of species over thousands of years, but they had never faced an enemy that could adapt and evolve faster than they could respond. As zealothy forces mobilized for what they hoped would be a final decisive battle, the human leadership realized they had one chance to end the war permanently. They had to strike at the heart of the Empire before it could adapt to their tactics and develop countermeasures for the weapons and strategies that had brought them so much success. 10 years after Earth's fall, humanity had become something the zealothy Empire never expected to face. Kevin Zhang walked through a zealothy trade station wearing the biosuit that made him look like a KEF worker, while his partner, Nicole Davis, posed as a Valdris energy technician. They had spent 2 years learning to impersonate subject species and could now move freely through most areas of zealothy space without arousing suspicion. Their mission was to plant surveillance devices in the station's communication hub, but they were also gathering intelligence about how the Empire really operated. The zealothy had grown lazy over centuries of easy conquest and relied heavily on automated systems to manage their vast territories. Most of the actual work was done by subject species, while the zealothy themselves focused on expansion and military operations. This created countless opportunities for sabotage that the Empire's leadership never considered possible. Human infiltration teams had learned to exploit these weaknesses by posing as maintenance workers and technicians who had access to critical systems. Dr. Lisa Carter's research team now included former zealothy scientist slaves who had defected after witnessing human ingenuity and determination. These alien scientists brought knowledge that human researchers could never have gained on their own about the biological components of zealothy technology. Working together, they developed a computer virus that was unlike anything that had ever been created before because it could attack both digital systems and living tissue. Simultaneously, the virus was designed to spread through the quantum entanglement networks that connected all zealothy technology across the galaxy. Unlike human computer viruses that simply corrupted data, this weapon would cause the biological components of alien systems to malfunction and die. Carter realized that if they could introduce the virus into the main network it would spread to, Every Zealoty facility in the Empire within hours. General Patricia Hayes operated from a mobile command center that jumped between star systems, using hyperspace routes that were too dangerous for normal traffic. She had spent 10 years building a network of human cells and allied alien resistance groups that now stretched across dozens of sectors. The resistance had evolved from desperate refugees into a professional military organization that could coordinate complex operations across vast distances. Commander Rachel Ford led the most dangerous missions of all by surgically altering humans to look like high-ranking Zealoty officials and placing them in positions throughout the Empire's government and military structure. These deep-cover operatives gathered intelligence about Zealoty plans while slowly sabotaging important decisions from within. The surgery was painful and often irreversible, but volunteers lined up for the chance to strike back at their enemy from the inside. The Zealoty began to notice that things were going wrong throughout their empire, but they could not identify the source of their problems. Supply shipments disappeared without explanation, and communication networks experienced mysterious failures that seemed to fix themselves before technicians could investigate. Military commanders reported equipment malfunctions that made no sense according to their technical manuals, and some facilities suffered catastrophic system failures that appeared to be caused by impossible combinations of circumstances. Kevin Jang's team successfully infiltrated a major Zealoty military base and discovered that the aliens were becoming paranoid about security threats they could not identify or understand. The base commander had increased patrols and implemented new identification procedures, but these measures were useless against infiltrators who looked and acted exactly like trusted personnel. The humans had learned to think like their enemies, while the Zealoty had never learned to think like humans. Nicole Davis made contact with a group of Kef rebels who controlled the waste processing systems for an entire industrial planet. Working together, they introduced Carter's virus into the planet's main computer network through the sewage treatment facilities where no one would think to look for security threats. The virus spread through the network like wildfire, causing machinery to malfunction and data systems to corrupt themselves beyond repair. Tony Rodriguez intercepted Zealoty communications that revealed growing concern among the Empire's leadership about the increasing frequency of system failures and security breaches. The aliens suspected sabotage but could not understand how primitive species could penetrate their advanced security systems. Some Zealoty commanders were beginning to request reinforcements for duties that should have been routine, while others reported mysterious equipment failures that seemed to target the most critical systems. Marcus Webb and Rebecca Torres had perfected techniques for modifying Zealoty technology to turn it against its creators. They could reprogram weapons to fire on Zealoty forces instead of their intended targets and alter navigation systems to send ships to wrong destinations. Their modifications were subtle enough to avoid detection until the moment they activated, but devastating enough to cripple entire military operations. The resistance achieved its greatest success when Rachel Ford's operatives managed to replace several key officials in the Zealoty colonial administration. These human agents began implementing policies that favored subject species, while creating bureaucratic obstacles that hindered military operations. The changes were gradual enough to avoid suspicion, but significant enough to weaken Zealoty control over conquered territories. Alex Stone coordinated a series of simultaneous attacks across 12 different star systems that demonstrated the Resistance's growing capabilities. Each attack targeted a different type of facility, using tactics specifically designed to maximize damage, while minimizing Zealoty casualties. The goal was not to kill aliens, but to demonstrate that nowhere in their empire was truly safe from human retaliation. The attacks succeeded beyond all expectations because they were supported by alien resistance groups that had been inspired by human examples of creativity and determination. Species that had accepted Zealoty rule for thousands of years suddenly began fighting back with tactics they had learned from observing human operations. The Empire found itself facing rebellions on dozens of worlds simultaneously while dealing with mysterious system failures that seemed to spread from planet to planet, Carter's virus had begun to take hold in major Zealothi computer networks, causing cascading failures that the aliens could not repair or even fully understand. The virus was designed to learn and adapt as it spread, which meant that each new system it infected became a launching point for attacks on connected networks. The Zealothi were beginning to realize that they faced an enemy that did not fight according to any rules they understood. 5 years had passed since Earth fell to the Zealothi Empire, and Commander Alex Stone still woke up every morning thinking about home. He led 3,000 human survivors from a hidden base carved into an asteroid deep in the Kepler system where no one would think to look for refugees. The base was cold and cramped, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered now. His people had learned to live on recycled air and protein bars while planning their next move against an enemy that controlled half the galaxy. Dr. Lisa Carter worked 18 hours a day in a laboratory that was barely larger than a closet studying pieces of Zealothi technology that raiding parties brought back from attacks on supply convoys. Her hair had gone gray from stress and lack of sleep, but her mind was sharper than ever as she slowly began to understand how the alien technology worked. She discovered that Zealothi devices use quantum entanglement in ways that human science had never imagined possible, and this gave her an idea that might level the playing field. Marcus Webb and Rebecca Torres worked alongside Carter, taking apart Zealothi weapons and computers with tools they had built from scavenged parts. Marcus had been a software engineer before the invasion, and Rebecca had designed spacecraft engines, but now they were humanity's best hope for reverse engineering alien technology. They worked by feel and intuition since they had no manuals or guides to help them understand devices that operated on principles that seemed to break the laws of physics. Tony Rodriguez spent his days monitoring Zealothi communications from a radio station that looked like a pile of junk, but could intercept signals from across 3 star systems. His translation software had improved dramatically over the years as he learned more about how the aliens thought and communicated. What he discovered in those intercepted messages gave humanity its first real reason for hope since the invasion began. The Zealothi Empire was not as strong as it appeared from the outside. Tony learned that the aliens controlled dozens of other species that had been conquered over thousands of years, and many of these subject races were growing restless under Zealothi rule. The Empire maintained control through fear and superior technology rather than loyalty or respect, which meant it could be vulnerable to the right kind of pressure applied in the right places. Jake Morrison commanded a small fleet of ships that had been captured from the Zealothi and modified with human improvements that made them faster and harder to detect. His crews were made up of survivors from a dozen different evacuation ships who had learned to work together despite coming from different countries and cultures. They struck at Zealothi supply lines and communication relays, then disappeared before the enemy could respond with overwhelming force. One of their most successful raids targeted a Zealothi research station in an abandoned star system where the aliens were experimenting with new weapons technology. Jake's team infiltrated the station while it was operating with a skeleton crew and managed to download massive amounts of data before the facility's automated defenses could stop them. The information they captured included detailed specifications for Zealothi ships and weapons, along with strategic plans for expanding the Empire into new regions of the galaxy. Lisa Carter studied the captured data for weeks and made discoveries that changed everything about how humans understood their enemy. The Zealothi were not a single unified species, but rather a collection of different alien races that had been absorbed into the Empire over time. The original Zealothi had conquered other species, then used their knowledge and abilities to become even more powerful. This meant that much of their technology was actually stolen from other races who might be willing to help humanity if approached correctly. More importantly, Carter learned that Zealothi quantum communication systems all connected to a central network that controlled everything from ship navigation to planetary defense systems. If humans could find a way to disrupt this network, they could cripple the entire empire at once. She began working on a computer virus specifically designed to attack quantum entanglement systems using principles that human scientists had developed but never been able to implement. Tony made contact with resistance groups from other conquered species and discovered that humans were not alone in fighting against Zealoty rule. The Kef were an insect-like race that had been enslaved for over 2,000 years, but still maintained secret communication networks across their homeworld. The Valdris were energy beings that had been forced to power Zealoty machines but were learning to sabotage the systems they were trapped in. Dozens of other species were fighting their own quiet wars against the Empire. Alex Stone began coordinating with these alien resistance groups to plan joint operations that would strain Zealoty resources across multiple fronts simultaneously. Humans provided tactical expertise and innovative solutions while their alien allies contributed knowledge about Zealoty weaknesses and access to restricted areas of space. The cooperation was difficult at first since none of the species had ever worked together before, but desperation made strange allies. The breakthrough came when Marcus Webb successfully reverse-engineered a Zealoty cloaking device and improved it using human engineering principles. The modified cloaking system not only made human ships invisible to Zealoty sensors but also allowed them to pass through enemy security barriers without being detected. This technology made it possible for human infiltration teams to reach targets that had previously been impossible to attack. Rebecca Torres used her engineering background to design new weapons that combined human creativity with Zealoty power. Sources creating devices that were more effective than anything either species had built alone. Her hybrid torpedo could penetrate Zealoty shields, and her modified energy rifles could overload alien armor systems. These weapons gave human raiders the firepower they needed to take on Zealoty forces in direct combat. The war was changing from a hopeless struggle for survival into something that might actually be winnable. Humans were no longer just running and hiding but actively fighting back with weapons and tactics that the Zealoty had never encountered before. The Empire was beginning to realize that they faced an enemy unlike anything they had conquered in the past, but they still did not understand just how dangerous humans could be when they had nothing left to lose. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Horizon watching the stars streak past as they traveled through hyperspace toward what would change everything for humanity. He had commanded deep space missions for 12 years, but nothing like this first contact mission to meet an alien race that had been sending signals from near Proxima Centauri for the past 3 years. Earth's best scientists had worked day and night to decode those signals and finally understood enough to know the aliens were intelligent and possibly friendly. Dr. Lisa Carter checked her equipment one more time in the science lab while thinking about all the years she had spent studying the possibility of alien life. She had written dozens of papers about what aliens might look like and how they might think, but now she would finally meet them face to face. Her hands shook slightly as she calibrated the biological scanners that would analyze any alien specimens they encountered. Everything had to be perfect for this historic moment. Tony Rodriguez sat at his communication station running final tests on the translation software he had spent 2 years developing. The alien signals followed patterns that reminded him of ancient Earth languages mixed with mathematical concepts that hurt his brain to think about. His computer programs could now translate basic concepts, but complex ideas would still need time and patience. He hoped the aliens would be understanding about the language barrier. The Horizon dropped out of hyperspace 3 days later in a system that looked almost normal except for the massive structures orbiting the fourth planet. Jake ordered the ship to approach slowly while broadcasting the peaceful greeting message that Tony had prepared in the alien language. The structures were clearly artificial and far larger than anything humans had ever built. Some of them stretched for hundreds of kilometers and pulsed with energy patterns that made the ship's sensors go crazy. Lisa watched her screens fill with data about technology that seemed impossible. The alien structures were using energy sources that human science said could not exist and materials that should have collapsed under their own weight. She tried to record everything, but there was too much information coming in too fast. Her excitement grew as she realized they were seeing technology that was thousands of years ahead of anything on Earth. 3 alien ships approached the horizon, and they were beautiful in a terrifying way. Their hulls seemed to be made of living metal that shifted and flowed like water while maintaining perfect structural integrity. The ships were 10 times larger than the horizon and moved with grace that defied physics. Jake ordered his crew to maintain position and continue broadcasting. Their peaceful intentions. Tony received a response from the alien ships and his translation software worked frantically to decode the message. What came through made his blood run cold. The aliens called themselves the Zelothy Empire, and they were not interested in peaceful contact. They considered humanity to be a primitive species that existed only to serve more advanced races. The message was polite but firm in explaining that humans would surrender their ship and submit to Zelothy authority. Jake refused to surrender and ordered the Horizon to retreat toward the edge of the system. The Zelothy ships followed without seeming to hurry, which worried him more than an aggressive pursuit would have. Lisa's sensors showed the alien ships were not even using their full power as they easily kept pace with the Horizon at maximum speed. It became clear that the human ship was completely outmatched. The Zelothy opened fire with weapons that passed through the Horizon's shields like they were not even there. Jake watched helplessly as sections of his ship simply vanished under the alien energy beams. Emergency alarms screamed throughout the ship as hull breaches appeared in places where there had been solid metal moments before. The crew worked desperately to keep the ship intact while Jake plotted a jump to hyperspace. Tony managed to intercept more Zelothy communications, and what he learned made him sick with fear. The aliens were not just interested in one human ship, but had already dispatched harvester fleets toward Earth. The invasion would begin in less than 72 hours, and Earth had no idea what was coming. He tried to send a warning message to Earth, but the Zelothy were jamming all communications. The Horizon limped into hyperspace just as the alien weapons began cutting through the engine section. Jake set course for Earth at maximum speed, knowing they would arrive only hours before the invasion began. Lisa worked frantically to analyze the data they had collected about Zelothy technology while Tony tried to find ways to break through the communication jamming. Both of them knew that Earth's military would need every advantage they could get. The journey home took 18 hours, and Jake spent every minute planning how to warn Earth's defenses about what they would face. The Zelothy had technology that made human weapons look like stone axes and ships that could destroy Earth's entire space fleet without taking damage. He realized that humanity's only chance might be to evacuate key people and technology before the planet fell. As the Horizon dropped out of hyperspace. Near Earth, Jake saw the most beautiful and terrifying sight of his life. Earth hung in space, looking peaceful and unaware while dark shapes moved between the outer planets like sharks circling prey. The Zelothy harvester fleets had arrived and the invasion was about to begin.